We're going to dive right into it and turn things over to our elder, Albert Marshall. So the theme is two-eyed seeing in ethical space. And I felt that Sarah and Kate set things up beautifully. What is holding us back? We've got technologies that are cutting greenhouse gases significantly. We have the technology, so what's the real problem? I think we can learn a lot by exploring two-eyed seeing, which is really about bringing knowledge systems together, working together. How do we do that? Sounds simple, right? We just sit down and make some decisions. The reality is, it hasn't worked. There's a lot to that whole process. We're going to turn things over to Albert to set the table on two-eyed seeing. How do we make that work, Albert?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. This is indeed an honor. I send greetings from the East, in which I believe everything begins from the East, and it has eventually manifested westward. Now, two-eyed seeing, to me, is very much inherent to our Aboriginal ways of thinking. I, as a Mi'kmaq person, when I invoke my Mi'kmaq lens, I first of all have to look, I know who I am, and I know where I come from. But sometimes I'm wondering, how effective am I when I ask myself this question, what am I doing here? And I believe if we can all somehow invoke our Aboriginal lens, we will ask ourselves those questions. Now, how we got here, obviously, it's a sad story. But one thing that's very obvious to us today is we have witnessed how our source of life has been devastated without due consideration for the future generation. And with that, I believe, when we invoke our Aboriginal lens, I believe we have to really look at how do we change our focus and our directions. Obviously, we have been sharing our philosophies, our ideologies, and why we were meant not just to be the eye and the ear for our Mother Earth, but to transform those into action in which we will not only allow ourselves, but also remind others that every action that we take has to be in harmony with our Earth Mother. And if for some reason, individually or collectively, someone causes a negative reaction, then I believe together we should come together and begin to mitigate and to restore the damage that has been done. Unfortunately, though, science has been used as an overarching objective to lead us and to remind us of how we should conduct ourselves when we are with our Earth Mother. But obviously, science cannot include the spiritual aspect of life. And this is where I believe we come in which we now need action. And that action, I believe, now has to be, in my humble opinion. Yes, we have rights, and with rights comes responsibilities. But let's not forget those rights are also enshrined in the Constitution. And with that, we all know that we are the only group of people in this hemisphere that have a special relationship with the Land Tour Treaty and Aboriginal rights. So I believe changing our focus, I believe we should be focusing and concentrating on a learning institution for our wampums and our treaties to become part and parcel of educating not just our young Aboriginal people, but educating everyone what those treaties are meant. Because I believe if more and more people would become aware and knowledgeable of what those treaties are, what those treaties and wampums are really as what our ancestors had really agreed upon, how to coexist, and that our ancestors never surrendered any part of their rights to maintain this beautiful creation of ours in harmony. So education, then, I think, has to be our focus now. At the same time, I believe we have to somehow use our rights to assert some action. Apparently, the government and the industry is not aware that we have exhausted the carrying capacity of the system. And we also have exhausted the cleansing capacity of the system. With the rate of extraction, she can no longer regenerate herself. With the rate of injections of toxins into her, she can no longer cleanse herself. And this is what I believe now our main conversation today is climate change. And here we are, we have responsibilities of ensuring that during our short stay here, we will do everything in our power to ensure that the next 7 generations will not only have the same opportunity, but better opportunities than the ones that were here when we first came upon. So those responsibilities, really, in my humble opinion, are ongoing. And if we can really focus on these future generations, even this young generation, what kind of a future are we leaving them? What kind of a stress are we going through if they can see that that this source of life will also be able to sustain themselves and all other life, because we know from our teachings, from our ancestors, that we are not nature. We are just a very small part and parcel of her. But yet we have something that no other creature had. And that something is the cognitive mind. So let's use that cognitive mind to make sure that any action that's going to be taken upon our source of life will be harmonious. And if it's not harmonious, then we're not only going to mitigate it and restore it, but we can create alternatives so that people can sustain themselves without compromising the ecological integrity of the area. I don't know really how much time I have, but anyway.
Well, Willal and Albert, for that, this is Dan. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. I just want to maybe add a question for, maybe you can clarify on this and share with us here today your thoughts around this. Some years ago, back in the late 90s, a good friend of ours, Willie Ermine, was doing a study in his work. He brought forward this article written by, I want to say, Roger Poole, that wrote an article towards deep subjectivity in 1972. Willie took that article and he built, as a legal scholar, he built an argument around that and built an idea around that he refers to as ethical space. He talks about this idea in that instance of the ethical space as being a engagement of Indigenous legal traditions and Western or Canadian legal systems. And he talked about that in bringing the engagement of knowledge systems and the challenges that it brought forward, and the necessity of creating this ethical space. So in lieu of that kind of understanding and building upon the work that Willie talked about, we moved that from a legal framework over to an environmental framework, over to an ecological framework. And so, Albert, my question then really, and maybe you can share with us, is that how do you think about ethical space in the illustration of two-eyed seeing?
Well, ethical space, I believe, is something in which, when we talk about two-eyed seeing, the ideas, the philosophies, and ideologies are based on this concept of ethical space, in which every action we take has to be ethical, has to be right, has to be balanced. Because just like what the word implies, the word ethics, that is our direction in which how we should conduct ourselves while we are here. And be very mindful. Yes, we have rights, but over and above that, we also have responsibilities. And that ethical space, I believe, encourages us and motivates us to ensure that every action that's going to be taken by us and by others is going to be in harmony with nature. Because if she is not healthy, how can we survive? And when it comes to right, it also reminds us that nature has rights, humans have responsibility. So ethical space, we may not repeat it over and over again, but it's very much built into those wisdoms and lessons that were left for us here by our ancestors. That's the only way that I can put it into my perspective.
Thank you, Albert. Maybe to expand on that question, so you've set the table about thinking about technology, our responsibilities to nature, and selecting technology. I'm just wondering your thoughts on bringing two systems together. Indigenous, Western, how in people coming together, how do you ensure that relationship is respectful? I know you and I have seen those relationships go off the rails. What's your advice when people come together, whether it's small group, big project, small project? What's some of your advice to ensure that everybody who comes into the that circle that's created by those two systems that their needs are met in the decision-making process.
I have to go back to the time in which, when people were established in this country here, in which there was a need for some kind of an agreement. And those agreements, of course, what we now know as treaties. When you translate that word treaty in our language, it's called Ankugamkewel, which could then break it down. Our inherent responsibilities is to make sure that we're going to maintain a very sustainable life. But before we can go there, we have to first establish a relationship. Because without a relationship, we're not going to know who that person is, where that person comes from, and who they are. And once those questions are shared, then the relationship can begin. And through that relationship, you will then know and become aware the gifts that this person may have, and how these gifts can be used and applied collectively, using two perspectives, the mainstream perspective and the Aboriginal perspective, to enrich the perspective so that the outcome will be much more effectively achieved in a harmonious way. So that's the only way that I can, at this point, emphasize that we have to, among other tasks that we have to do, we have to spend as much time establishing a relationship, because through a relationship we will be able to share one another the gifts that we all have, and how those gifts can be used for the benefit of all. And that word benefit of all, I think, to me, implied for all sorts of life, because we are so interdependent, interconnected with our beautiful creation.
Miigwech for that, Albert. Well, all in.
Albert, one of the things that, I think people tend to grapple with on a daily basis, those of us that are, within the area, is really looking at, what are the precepts, the foundations about how we engage with one another and how we move forward. And this struggle between knowledge systems and how they are brought together, it's been over 20 years that you and your late wife, Merdina, have come up with the idea and worked with Cheryl Bartlett from the University of Cape Breton to bring this idea of two-eyed seeing to the general population. Now it's 25 years later, it's becoming more common knowledge. As we kind of move forward, what do you see as the next steps or the evolution of two-eyed seeing? In conversations that you and I have had over the past years, you talked about this was the initial step, and as we move forward and as we evolve and build that critical mass of knowledge and acceptance and the understanding of the concept, what's the next steps that you see for generally moving this idea forward?
Well, obviously, we can all agree that there is a great need of a transformative change. And that transformative change, I believe, has to begin where everything everything and how we are now was the birthplace of this source, which is the education. We have to be very adamant and determined that system has to be transformed to be just as reflective to us as well as to what the intent is. Unfortunately, the education systems have provided an opportunity for our people to be able to sustain themselves in this technological world. But it has done nothing of who they are as original inhabitants of this hemisphere. So by being very adamant and determined and persuasive of including our languages, our history, our ceremonies into the institution, we may not convert everyone, but at least we can educate them of who we are. Because without education, I believe it reinforces fear and suspicion. Because fear and suspicion, I believe, has been used to divide us. Now, if this is something I believe that's worth entertaining, I believe this is one of the suggestions that I would like to make, is that there's a lot of our non-native brothers and sisters out there that are very much concerned with the current state of our environment. And I know a lot of them would even admit it's not the polluter that's a problematic. It's the people that are remaining silent. And the reason why I believe most people are remaining silent is because they don't know an alternative to what they have been told. And we can generate those alternatives. That yes, we can sustain ourselves, but in so doing, you cannot compromise the ecological integrity of the area. And yes, we need economic opportunities, and we can create those economic opportunities, and not so much in extraction, but also encourage the institutions to transfer the science and begin to mitigate and to restore the damage that has been caused. I'm more than comfortable in saying that could also generate just as much economic opportunities as it does in extraction.
I think we could just add that, for many of us here, we understand the importance of that and the role of economy, in being able to help us to move this agenda forward. But at the end of the day, and Al Gore had talked about that in his early movie, that Inconvenient Truth, where he talks about the idea of politics, and politics being one of the motivators of change. But I think we can all agree that it's not just a political decision. It's not just a political solution, nor is it an economics solution alone. It's a social solution. But I would add that for most of us as Indigenous peoples, and the people that have the capacity, all of us, to be able to have that connection to place and connection to the unseen world, it's a spiritual necessity for revitalization. I think one of the challenges as we begin to kind of move forward is looking at how do we enact that? What are the next steps to be able to create that positive change? And understanding that we are running against time in terms of not just learning how to live in place, and not just being able to live well, but at the same time, many of the things that we are continually, all of us, dependent upon, are becoming more and more unsustainable as we move forward. So those things that we had entrusted in, in terms of our political systems, our healthcare systems, our criminal justice systems, our education, etc. All of those things, our economic systems, are becoming more and more unsustainable as we speak. I think that, as we look forward, one of the opportunities that we have is to recognize that in all of our, and I hope that you would agree with me, that in understanding that, moving to the next steps, the opportunity that rests for us in the new economy is predicated on restoration. Restoration, not just in terms of ecological and environmental degradation and the necessity of restoring those degraded areas, but more specifically on the human side of it as well. That the revitalization of human spiritual integrity, that the restoration of the human condition needs to be urgently addressed as well. So however you see yourself in that in that spectrum, whether it's ecological or human or both, that revitalization really needs to be center and the restoration needs to be center in developing our new economy going forward.
Well, all I have to do is look backward and really hear and see what our ancestors, what our forefathers and ancestors have managed to achieve. And the way I see it is, what really was a factor, the word resilient, considering the odds that they were up against, they somehow managed to overlook that odds and see. And they train themselves and they convey that message that let's not look at what we cannot do. Let's look at what we can do and focus on that and apply all the energy that we have. Energy from us and from within. Because yes, we can rattle off for hours the problems that we are confronting, that we are being confronted. But I believe it's got to come to a time in our lives in which, yes, there's going to be odds, there's going to be resistance, there's going to be challenges. But let's not spend too much energy on that and apply that energy on innovation, moving forward, of creating a better future for the next 7 generations. That's the only way that I can answer that question, because, I mean, the lessons are there for us. All we have to do is just extract them and apply them. You apply them at this moment. They have paved the way for us. We couldn't even imagine the challenge that they were facing. And I'm sure they acknowledged those challenges. But they didn't allow those challenges to deter them of what their objectives were.
Well said, Albert. I think that you couldn't have said it any better. And I think one of the great blessings and the recognition of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous traditions and practices as going forward, is the opportunity for us to be able to look back and, as Albert talked about, to recognize, what our great ancestors have provided for us. In understanding the nature of Indigenous knowledge, which, in its relationship to Western knowledge, as an example, talks about the idea for us that our knowledge came from a place of spirit, that it didn't come out of the minds of human beings, that predicated on the Western end of it, it mainly comes out of the minds of men, and not all men, but just white men. And so the idea behind that is that one instance that it is fallible, it's human-based. The other is that, it is perfect in its nature, that it has served us well over millennia and will continue to serve us into the future, but understanding that it comes from a place of spirit, so it is powerful and pure in its nature. So as we move forward and begin this discussion about how we understand knowledge and knowledge systems, and being able to look forward, bringing those ideas together, and not to say that necessarily one is better than the other, but the idea, I think, that was shared with us this morning in Rick's presentation, where he unfolded that two-row wampum belt, we can begin to talk about that in terms of two-row science, two-row education, two-row justice, two rows of moving forward. Because when we think about that and the illustration that he provided for us, of those two vessels, one a canoe and one a sailboat, representing our peoples, all of the Indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island, all of the European and the now emerging diversity of human beings, anyone that are choosing to live within the territory of our traditional territories and on Turtle Island. The nature of that is that, and the reality behind it is that, and we can all agree, that as those two vessels are portrayed, they are sailing down the river of life together. And now the reality is the river of life, all life, is in jeopardy. And so it behooves us then and necessitates us now bringing our minds together to address, the complexity that we're facing, the compounded issues that we're facing, that are dependent not just on us as human beings doing the work, but more specifically us working together to ensure, as Albert talked about, to ensure the ecological integrity is maintained, that we restore, not only ecological well-being, but also human well-being, human development. And at the same time, the challenge then for us is to how to do that. One of the great principles that are embedded within our traditions lays out those principles for engagement. They talk about peace, friendship, and respect. They talk about trust and respect. All of those pieces then are necessary in us being able to extrapolate and to see and to create for us a framework of ethical space moving forward and how to do that. Those thoughts have already been laid out by our great ancestors so long time ago. So taking the opportunity to be reflective on that, bringing them into today's conversation, that's the work for all of us now. And again, not to beat ourselves up, but for this, in this context, with addressing the environmental issues that we're all facing, and you all know them very well, all of those issues, from issues around food, global sickness and diseases, all precipitated around issues on overpopulation, the extinction of species, the loss of biodiversity, you know them all under the umbrella of global climate change. We've never had to face this complexity ever in human history. So complex thinking then demands, complex thinking or issues demands complex thinking to create innovative solutions to our problems that we commonly face. And so for us then, the real opportunity is to be able to brush away all of the issues around dominance and around inequities, and to be able to start these earnest conversations about how to move the agenda forward. And I want to thank Albert and his late wife Mardina for all of the work that they did, and so long time ago, coming with the idea and bringing this forward. And now, 25 years later, it's common speak for many of us in the field of two-eyed seeing. So thank you, Albert, for that.
And if I may add my last word here, one of the fundamental principles of course on two-eyed seeing is to maintain and enhance a relationship. We call it co-learning. So to highlight that, we came up with this metaphor. And this metaphor is two sleds. And it says, if it has to go to your perspective or to your mainstream knowledge perspective or Eric-centric system, you take the lead, and we will get behind and push. So we will get there. We will get there in a good way. And if it has to go to the Aboriginal traditional knowledge direction, we change role. We take the lead role, and our non-native brothers and sisters will get behind, and they do the pushing. And I just like to paraphrase what I was saying about my ancestors. I'm sure someone might have said, to all of us, stand up for your rights. No one else is going to do it for you. And those rights, we have to make sure that the next 7 generations or any future generation, we have to be very mindful of them. Make sure that our actions are going to be reflective in which they will benefit. We will not be leaving the deficit if nothing is done at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. I'm going to take a question from the floor, and I'm actually going to invite Sarah and Kate if they'd like to ask a question. We've got a few more minutes.
Well, that was unexpected, but thank you very much. I learned a lot over the last half hour, so thank you for sharing so much. And I guess I just want to, being an educator myself, that's what I've given a lot of my life to so far, I really appreciate the call for transforming education and for finding new ways of working together. And I just wonder if you have a story or an example of how you've seen that really work well in practice, and that we could all sort of learn from, of how to do this kind of learning together better along these two rows.
Well, we took this concept called learning, and we were somehow successful in developing a curriculum here in Capitan University. And that course became known as Integrative Science, in which it did exactly what it was meant to do, by integrating Western science with the Aboriginal ways of knowing and being. And that has been very, the program eventually died down. But the people that were involved in it are very much active now of applying those two knowledges together, so that they can become much more effective of taking care of our natural world. So that's the only example that I can give you at this juncture in which it was totally accepted within the institution, in which it became what do you call them? Well, whatever term that you use, it became part of the curriculum. It wasn't just an add-on, but it became part of it. It was validated. Well, I don't know what terms they use in institutions, but it became a core subject, a core curriculum, I mean. And that's where we have to go, because if we're going to empower our young people, both native and non-native, we have to give them another perspective. And that perspective is, how did our ancestors manage to coexist in this complex system called Mother Nature or environment, without them ever compromising the ecological integrity of the area? So there has to be lessons within that. And I'm sure a lot of these young people would be very eager to learn more. So by being very determined of ensuring that our traditional ways of knowing has to become part of that knowledge system for everyone.
Chimigwech, Albert, thank you for sharing your wisdom today. I think you're traveling off to the Yukon shortly. Safe travels, and I'm going to pass the mic to Dan to share his appreciation.
Well, Willal and Albert, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being such a great friend and brother to all of us, and thank you for all of the work that you and your late wife, Merdina, has done in bringing this to our attention. And again, I want to thank all of you for coming today. Thank you for being here with us.